I always thought I was ready for anything marriage could throw at me. Financial struggles, sickness, even betrayal. At least, I thought I knew the limits of what betrayal could be. You imagine it in cliches. Lipstick on a collar, a late-night text from an unfamiliar number, a scent of perfume that isn't yours lingering on his shirt. You never imagine that the other woman could be someone whose voice you've known since birth. It started like a shadow at the edge of my vision, something I wasn't supposed to notice. My husband had been acting softer in a strange way. He'd linger in the kitchen longer than necessary when she was visiting. I'd catch him laughing, not just polite chuckles, but deep, comfortable laughter at something she'd said. And I told myself, of course they get along. She's my mother. I wanted them to like each other. I wanted a family that felt warm. But warmth can burn if you get too close. Looking back, there were moments that now feel like red flags waving in plain sight. The way her hand would rest on his arm just a second too long. The way his eyes would flicker toward her when he thought I wasn't looking. I pushed those thoughts away because thinking them felt like poisoning myself. My mother had raised me, protected me, taught me who I could trust. And my husband, he was supposed to be the man who stood beside me against the world. I didn't know yet that they'd already crossed a line, that while I was worrying about bills, about our son's grades, about the dull, everyday grind of marriage, the two people I trusted most were busy tearing apart the foundation of my life. When the truth finally came, it didn't arrive like a storm. It was quieter than that. Quieter and somehow more dangerous. The first real crack in the illusion appeared on a Sunday morning. My husband had gone out early, claiming he needed to pick up a part for the lawnmower. He came back with coffee, not just for me, but for her. My mother was staying with us that weekend, helping while I was busy with work, as she put it. The thing was, he'd gotten her coffee exactly the way she liked it. Extra cream, 1 sugar, the lid turned so the seam faced away from her mouth. It was such a small detail, but I froze. He didn't even know how I liked my coffee without asking. I told myself it meant nothing. That's what you do. You explain it away before the truth can settle in. But once you notice one thing, your mind starts making a list you didn't ask for. The quick smile they shared over dinner when they thought I wasn't looking, how he seemed to stand a little taller when she complimented him, how her laughter was softer, warmer when it was aimed at him. The moment that lodged in my chest came a few days later. I had left my phone in the living room and came back to find them sitting closer than I'd ever seen before. Not touching, but close enough that the air between them seemed charged. Their conversation stopped the moment they saw me. And then the worst part, she looked guilty. My own mother. That night, I lay awake beside my husband, staring at the ceiling, feeling something cold bloom in my chest. I realized that I was already pulling away from both of them, like an animal curling around a wound. I wasn't ready to confront it yet, maybe because I knew that once I asked the question, I couldn't unhear the answer. But deep down, some part of me already knew. And once you know, even if you can't prove it, you can't go back to before. It was the smell that gave them away. Not perfume, not cologne, something subtler, almost innocent, the faint, sweet trace of my mother's lavender hand cream. I'd been smelling it on her for years. It was hers, as much a part of her as her voice or the way she stirred her tea. That night, I caught it on him. We were in bed, and as he leaned over to kiss me goodnight, the scent wrapped around me like a snake. My first thought was absurd. Maybe she hugged him earlier. But the way it clung to his skin, warm and recent, made that excuse crumble in seconds. The next morning, I decided to test them. I told my mom I had an early meeting and left the house for work, parking a few blocks away. I waited. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I watched the clock. At exactly 9:15, his truck pulled back into the driveway. He wasn't supposed to be home until the afternoon. I walked in quietly,
heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. They were in the kitchen, too close. She was laughing, brushing something off his shirt, her fingers lingering just a second too long. And there it was again, that look. Not of two people who'd been caught in something shameful, but of two people trying desperately to look normal. Forgot my laptop. I lied, my voice flat. I could see their shoulders stiffen. He mumbled something about fixing the sink. She pretended to be looking for sugar in the cabinet. I grabbed my bag and left. But in that moment, I knew there was no more pretending. The cracks weren't cracks anymore. The wall had fallen, and I was standing in the rubble, too afraid to pick up a single piece. When betrayal moves from suspicion to certainty, it's almost anticlimactic. The world doesn't explode, the air doesn't shift. You just know. And then you have to decide what you're going to do with that knowledge. I decided I needed proof. Not because I doubted my instincts, but because I knew them. Both of them. They'd twist my words, turn my anger into paranoia, make me question my own mind. Gaslighting runs in my family like an inherited disease. So I started paying attention to the smallest things. I noted the days her lipstick was smudged before noon, the times he suddenly needed to grab something from home while I was still at work. I noticed when her laundry basket was missing, even though she was supposedly spending the day reading in her room. I moved a picture frame on the nightstand in the guest room, just half an inch. The next time I checked, it had been moved back. Then I set the trap. I told them I had to travel overnight for a work conference. In reality, I drove 2 towns over, checked into a motel, and came back home just after midnight. The house was dark, but not empty. His truck was in the driveway. I crept around the side, my bare feet silent on the grass. Through the sliver of the half-closed curtains in the guest room, I saw them. Not in bed, not kissing, just sitting together, close enough that their knees touched, her hand resting lightly on his. The intimacy of it hit me harder than anything physical could have. It was the kind of touch that said this wasn't a fling. This was something they'd been building. I didn't confront them, not yet. I went back to my motel, lay in the too cold bed, and stared at the ceiling. I wasn't ready to blow up my life in the middle of the night, but I knew the detonation was coming, and when it did, I'd be the one holding the match. The morning after, I moved through the house like nothing had happened, made coffee, fed the dog, asked my mom if she'd slept well. She smiled too easily and said she had. He came into the kitchen a few minutes later, kissed me on the cheek, and poured himself a mug. Their casualness would have been convincing to anyone else, but I'd seen them, and now every interaction felt like a lie draped in polite conversation. I knew I couldn't confront them in the heat of my own emotions. I needed control, the kind of control they wouldn't expect from me. That meant gathering more than just a few stolen glances through a curtain. I wanted words, confessions, something undeniable. So I bought a small audio recorder, slipped in under the couch cushions in the living room where they spent the most time alone. I told myself it wasn't about revenge. It was about survival, about making sure they couldn't rewrite my reality the way people in my family always had. Days passed with nothing but boring, everyday chatter. I almost started to think maybe I'd imagined the depth of it, until Thursday afternoon. I came home early, quietly unlocking the door. They didn't hear me. I stood in the hallway, just out of sight, and listened. Her voice was soft, almost guilty. She's starting to notice. His voice was lower, sharper. Then we just have to be more careful. It wasn't an admission of love. It wasn't even romantic, but it was enough. Enough to tell me they'd talked about me, about the risk, about keeping it hidden. That night, I copied the audio file to my phone. I didn't listen to it again. I didn't need to. The words were already etched into me, and as I lay in bed beside him, his breathing deep and even, I realized I wasn't afraid of the confrontation anymore. I was looking forward to it. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of a dramatic, screaming confrontation. No throwing dishes, no slamming doors. If they were going to remember this moment for the rest of their lives, and they would, I wanted it to be for how cold and precise it was. So I waited. Saturday morning, she was making breakfast, moving around my kitchen like she owned the place. He was at the table scrolling through his phone, coffee steaming in front of him. I walked in wearing my calmest face, the one I'd used in job interviews and hospital waiting rooms. I set my phone on the table and pressed play. Her voice filled the room. She's starting to notice. His followed. Then we just have to be more careful. Silence. It was almost funny the way their bodies froze before their faces did. His eyes darted to her. Hers darted to the door like she might run. I don't need explanations, I said, my voice even. I don't need apologies. I just need you both to understand that I know exactly who you are. She started to speak, but I raised my hand. Don't. Every word you say will just make it worse. I didn't throw them out right then. That would have been too easy. Instead, I told her to finish cooking, told him to take out the trash. I moved through the rest of the morning as if nothing had changed, because the truth was, everything had already changed. They thought I'd explode, that I'd hand them the satisfaction of watching me break. But I wasn't broken. I was sharpening. When I finally did tell them to leave, later, without warning, there was no shouting, just the sound of their footsteps fading down the driveway and the heavy click of my door locking behind them. I made myself coffee. I drank it hot. And for the first time in weeks, it didn't taste bitter.
They didn't try to come back right away. Maybe they were afraid. Maybe they thought I'd cool down and open the door again. But people like them don't understand. Once the door locks in my mind, it never opens the same way twice. The first few days after they were gone, the house felt bigger, too big. I'd hear footsteps that weren't there, smell her perfume in the hallway, notice the absence of his coffee mug on the counter. Those ghosts were harder to banish than the people themselves. I filled the silence with small, deliberate acts, rearranged the living room so the couch faced the opposite wall, burned the blankets they always wrapped themselves in while watching TV, scrubbed the kitchen until it smelled like lemon instead of betrayal. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed. His name. I didn't answer. Minutes later, a voicemail appeared, his voice shaky, telling me it was all a misunderstanding, that nothing really happened. The coward's version of a confession. The next day, it was her. Her message was longer, tears in her voice, words like forgiveness and family. I didn't delete it right away, not because I believed her, but because I wanted to remember exactly how far she'd fallen from the pedestal I once put her on. I didn't call either of them back, not out of pettiness, but because I'd finally realized I didn't owe them the courtesy of closure. By the end of the week, the house no longer smelled like them. My bed no longer felt like ours. And when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the woman who was blindsided in her own home. I saw the woman who'd stood in her kitchen, pressed play, and ended a lie without raising her voice. And she didn't need anyone's permission to keep going. It was the third Sunday since I'd sent them both out of my life when I ran into Marlene, my next-door neighbor. She was the type who noticed everything: the mail left in your box, the groceries you carried in, the way your curtains moved at night. Normally, I kept our exchanges polite and brief, but that day, her eyes lingered on me a little too long. "I've been meaning to ask," she began, her voice low. "Was it about them?"
the way she said it, like it was already common knowledge, made my stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "I saw her car here. A lot. More than yours sometimes, and once, when you were at work, I swear I heard laughing. His laugh, hers too. I figured you knew, or maybe..." She trailed off, realizing the answer. Her words were gasoline on a fire I'd been trying to smother. I forced a small smile. "I know now," I said, and that was all. Marlene's face softened. "I'm sorry, honey. Some people just don't deserve what you give them." That night, I thought about how betrayal isn't always a lightning strike. Sometimes it's a slow leak. Everyone else might hear the drip before you do. And in some twisted way, her casual confirmation felt like validation, proof that I hadn't overreacted, that I wasn't imagining things. The worst part wasn't that they'd done it. It was that they'd done it so openly, believing no one would say a word. But Marlene had, even if it was too late to stop it. And for the first time in weeks, I felt less alone. Because if one person had noticed, maybe others had too. And maybe, deep down, they'd all been waiting to see what I'd do when I finally found out.
The mind has a cruel way of replaying things you once ignored. After talking to Marlene, I couldn't stop pulling at the threads of old memories, seeing them with new eyes. There was last Thanksgiving, when she insisted on helping me set the table while I was still cooking. I'd been too busy basting the turkey to notice how long she'd been in the dining room with him, whispering about something that made them both laugh until they nearly cried. I'd chalked it up to shared family jokes. Now, I wondered if the joke had been me. Or the time in March when he came home late, smelling faintly of her floral perfume. I'd teased him about it. "What, my shampoo isn't good enough for you?" And he'd grinned, kissed my forehead, and changed the subject. Back then, I thought it was harmless. Now, I knew better. Piece by piece, the timeline stretched back further. This hadn't been a single impulsive betrayal. It had been an affair built like a slow burning fire, fed in small doses, hidden in plain sight, and stoked whenever I wasn't looking. The realization made my chest ache in a different way, not from heartbreak, but from humiliation. How many family dinners had I smiled through while they exchanged secret glances over my shoulder? How many holidays had I celebrated with them, not realizing they were celebrating something else entirely? I thought I'd already reached the bottom of this betrayal, but understanding how far back it went, that was another drop into the dark. And yet, in some twisted way, it was freeing, because when you finally see the whole picture, you stop asking why. You already know.
The next morning, I woke up to the same four walls that had witnessed too much, and realized that I couldn't live among their ghosts any longer. It wasn't just about erasing the evidence of them. It was about reclaiming the air in my own home. I started in the living room. The throw blanket she'd given us for cozy nights went straight into a garbage bag. The wine glasses we used last Christmas, all four of them followed. I didn't care if they were expensive. To me, they were stunned. In the kitchen, I found the cutting board he'd bought after she'd suggested we try her famous lasagna recipe. I could still picture them at the table, side by side, explaining to me how to do it right, as if I'd been the guest in my own house. That board went into the bag without a second thought. I moved from room to room like that, filling bags with anything that carried even a trace of their presence. The framed photo from the beach trip, the cardigan she accidentally left here, the set of candles he said smelt like home. My home no longer smelt like that, and never would again. By noon, I had 6 heavy bags lined up by the door. Each one felt like a small exorcism. When I finally dragged them to the curb, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. It wasn't a complete cleanse, not yet. They'd left marks that weren't physical, things I couldn't toss into a garbage truck. But for the first time since I'd learned the truth, I could breathe without tasting their shadow in the air. And maybe that was the first real step toward moving on. Not forgiving, not forgetting, but making space where their absence felt lighter than their presence ever had.
That night, just as I was starting to feel the quiet settle in, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The screen lit up with a name I'd deleted weeks ago but couldn't erase from memory. It was him. I stared at it for a long time before opening the message. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an explanation. It was a single line. "Can we talk? It's not what you think." I almost laughed. The gall of it, to come crawling back with that tired phrase as if there were some version of the truth that would make this betrayal acceptable. I could picture him saying it, leaning forward, eyes soft in that practiced way, waiting for me to fold. But the worst part wasn't his nerve. It was a small, sharp tug in my chest at the sight of his name. A part of me still wanted to hear him out, to find some impossible reason that would stitch my life back into what it was before. I put the phone down, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. I stood there in the dim light, listening to the hum of the fridge, willing my heartbeat to slow. I told myself that I'd imagined that tug, that it was just habit, not hope. When I came back, the screen had gone dark again. I didn't reply. Not that night. Not yet. But I couldn't shake the feeling that by not answering, I had opened another door. Not to him, but to the fight inside me between the part that wanted closure and the part that wanted to burn the bridge so thoroughly that even his shadow couldn't cross it.
2 days later, the phone rang again, but it wasn't his number. It was hers. I hadn't heard my mother-in-law's voice since the day everything came out. Back then, she'd been quiet. Almost too quiet, as if she was holding a truth so heavy it might crush her if she let it slip. Now, her tone was syrupy sweet, the kind of sweetness that coats the blade. "I just think you're making a mistake, honey," she began, skipping the pleasantries. "You know he's been hurting. He didn't mean for things to happen this way." I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles whitening. She didn't even bother denying it. Things happened. That was her way of saying, "Yes, he did it, but can't you just be the bigger person?" "I'm not interested," I said flatly. But she kept going, weaving this narrative where he was the victim of loneliness, of misunderstanding, of my supposed coldness. And maybe worst of all, she spoke as though the betrayal had been inevitable, like the tide coming in. Finally, she dropped the real reason for her call. "He wants to come by just to talk. I told him you'd listen." I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You told him wrong." The silence on the line was thick. Then she exhaled sharply, as if I'd failed some unspoken test. "You'll regret letting go of a good man," she said before hanging up. I stood there for a long time, phone still in my hand, feeling a heat rise in my chest. Not just at him, but at her, at the quiet conspiracy they'd built, each covering for the other, making me out to be the unreasonable one for refusing to swallow their version of love. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about drawing a line so deep that no one, not even his mother, could pretend they could cross. I agreed to meet him, but only on my terms. A public place, broad daylight, nothing that could be mistaken for intimacy. I chose a small cafe downtown, one with wide windows that made it impossible to hide. When he walked in, I saw the hesitation in his step, like he was rehearsing which version of himself to be. The contrite one, probably. The man who made a mistake, not the one who tore a life apart. He smiled, tentative, sliding into the seat across from me. For a moment, I caught a flash of the man I'd once loved, and then it was gone, replaced by the stranger who had stood by while his mother tried to rewrite my reality. "I just want to explain," he started. "I don't need an explanation," I said, cutting him off. My voice was steady in a way it hadn't been in weeks. "I need you to hear me." He frowned, but nodded. "You don't get to decide what I should forgive. You don't get to have your mother call me and try to negotiate my pain. And you don't get to act like what you did is just some rough patch we can talk our way through." He opened his mouth, but I kept going. "I'm not here to reopen the door. I'm here to close it permanently." The words hung there between us. I saw them land. Saw the way his jaw tightened, the faint twitch in his temple. "You're making a mistake," he said finally, echoing his mother's words. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Maybe, but it's mine to make." I stood, left my coffee untouched, and walked out into the cold afternoon air. The door shut behind me with a dull thud, and for the first time, it felt like something inside me had shut with it, not out of fear or anger, but out of a fierce, necessary finality. At first, I thought leaving that cafe meant closing a chapter. But I underestimated her. My former mother-in-law had a way of slipping into the cracks of your life, finding the weak spots you didn't even know you had. It started small. A mutual acquaintance who suddenly stopped returning my calls. A neighbor who avoided eye contact in the grocery store. Then I heard from a friend that she'd been running into people I knew, sharing her own version of events. In her story, I was cold, ungrateful, unstable. A woman who had abandoned her family over a misunderstanding. The worst was when I found out she'd contacted my workplace. It was subtle, not an outright accusation, but a concerned-sounding email implying that I'd been struggling emotionally, that maybe I wasn't in the best place to handle my responsibilities. It was manipulative genius, poison disguised as care. I knew her tactics. This wasn't about winning me back into the family. This was about control. If she couldn't dictate my life from inside it, she'd do it from the outside, pulling strings until the walls closed in. One evening, as I was locking my apartment door, I spotted her across the street. She wasn't doing anything, just standing there, looking in my direction. She didn't wave, she didn't smile. She just waited long enough for me to see her, then walked away. It was a reminder, a warning, a way of saying, I can still reach you. I leaned against the closed door, heart pounding, and understood something I'd been avoiding. Walking away from a toxic person is only the first step. The real fight is making sure they can't follow.
That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, a half-empty cup of tea gone cold beside me. The screen's glow made the room feel smaller, like I was in a bunker planning for war. If she wanted to play this game, I needed to change the rules. No more reacting, no more hoping she'd just get tired and stop. People like her didn't stop. They escalated. I started with a notebook, writing down every incident I could remember, no matter how small. The phone calls, the sightings, the things mutual friends had told me. I included dates, times, who was present, even my emotional state afterward. It wasn't just a journal anymore, it was evidence. Then I went through my emails, texts, and voicemails. I downloaded copies and saved them to an external drive. I didn't trust cloud storage, not when she had connections. I even asked my neighbor, the one I still trusted, if she'd be willing to write down what she'd overheard a few weeks ago when my ex's mother had cornered me outside the building. She agreed. By dawn, I had a small folder of documents, photos, and screenshots. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next step was harder, contacting a lawyer. Just saying the word made my stomach knot. But I knew that if I wanted a restraining order or any legal protection, I'd need to show a pattern, not just one or two bad moments. I looked out the window at the first gray light of morning and realized something else. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about making sure that if I ever had children, they'd never be within reach of her. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like I had a plan. The law office smelled faintly of coffee and paper, a mix of comfort and bureaucracy. I sat across from a woman in her early 50s with silver hair pulled into a neat bun. Her eyes were sharp but kind.
The sort of gaze that could cut through excuses but still make you feel safe. I handed her my folder. She opened it without ceremony, flipping through the pages, her pen occasionally tapping the table when she saw something that mattered. After a few minutes, she looked up. "You've been documenting for how long?" she asked. "About 3 weeks," I said. "But it's been happening for months before that. Years, if I'm honest." She nodded. "Good. Documentation is everything in these cases. Without it, it's just your word against hers. And from what I'm seeing here, she's careful. She doesn't cross the line outright, she dances on it." That was the perfect description. The way she stood across the street, the calls disguised as concern, the whispers to my boss. Nothing you could point to and say, "This is a crime." But together, they formed a cage. The lawyer leaned forward. "I'm going to be honest with you. If she's this calculated, she's probably been doing this to people her entire life. We're not just building a case to keep her away from you. We're building one strong enough that she won't try this with anyone else." Something in me shifted. Until now, my focus had been survival, getting through each day without another blow. But here was someone telling me we could fight back. She slid a business card across the desk. "From this point forward, if she contacts you directly, don't respond. Send it to me, and if she escalates, and she will, we'll be ready." For the first time in months, I walked out of a building feeling like I wasn't alone in this.
The call came at 6:42 in the morning, that strange hour when the world is still quiet, but your body knows something's wrong before your mind catches up. I fumbled for the phone, half asleep. It was the school. "Miss Carter," the voice said, clipped and urgent. "There's been an incident. We need you to come down here immediately." My stomach dropped. "Is my son? He's safe, but you need to see this for yourself." I was out the door in less than 2 minutes, hair unbrushed, coat thrown over pajamas. The drive felt endless. My thoughts ran wild, every possible nightmare flashing behind my eyes. When I arrived, the principal met me in the front office. She looked unsettled, her hands clasped too tightly together. "One of our teachers intercepted your mother-in-law at the playground. She was telling your son you'd been in an accident and that she was there to take him home." The words didn't register right away. They floated in the air, heavy and unreal. What? The principal continued. She had a story ready. She even brought snacks for him, called him my boy, like she'd done it 1,000 times. If the teacher hadn't questioned her and called us, she might have walked out with him. I gripped the edge of the counter, the room tilting slightly. This wasn't whispers in a grocery store. This wasn't an email. This was crossing into my son's life, his safety, with calculated ease. And she had done it without a hint of hesitation. The principal handed me a folded slip of paper. "We wrote down the license plate before she drove off. You'll want to give it to the police." I took it, my fingers trembling, and in that moment the lawyer's words from last week rang in my head. She will escalate. Now I knew exactly how far she was willing to go.
The officer at the precinct didn't need much convincing. One look at the slip of paper with the license plate and the principal's written statement, and his jaw tightened. "You did the right thing coming in immediately," he said, glancing up at me from his desk. "This isn't just a family dispute anymore. This is attempted child abduction." The word hit me like a physical blow, not because I didn't believe it, but because hearing it from someone in uniform made it real in a way my own thoughts couldn't. I sat there, fingers knotted in my lap, answering his questions. Where had she been living? Had she made threats before? Was there a custody dispute? Each answer felt like peeling back another layer of the nightmare I'd been living, exposing the madness underneath. When he finished, he slid a form toward me. "We'll put in a restraining order request today. This will keep her away from your son's school, your home, and your workplace. But I'm going to be honest, someone willing to do what she just did, paper might not be enough." I thought about the lawyer's warning again. She will escalate. I realized that up until now, some part of me still believed this was just a twisted grudge, a battle of wills.
But standing in that fluorescent-lit room, pen in hand, I saw the truth. She wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted. When I left the station, I called my lawyer from the parking lot. My voice was steady, but my hand shook on the steering wheel. We need to move forward with full emergency custody protections, and I want cameras installed at my house before tonight. It wasn't about paranoia anymore. It was about staying one step ahead of a woman who had already crossed every boundary. And for the first time since this began, I felt the cold edge of real fear, the kind that doesn't fade when the sun comes up.
That night, after my son was asleep, 2 men from the security company arrived. They walked me through every blind spot outside the house, pointing to where cameras should go. I followed them in the dark, holding my sweater tight around me, scanning the street more than once. By 10 p.m., the cameras were live. I downloaded the app to my phone, tested each angle, and felt a strange mix of relief and unease. It was like putting a lock on a door I knew she had already tried to break through. Necessary, but not foolproof. Around midnight, I was still awake, scrolling through the footage from earlier in the evening when the motion alert chimed. My heart stopped. I tapped the notification, and there it was. Grainy, black and white, but unmistakable. She was standing across the street from my house. Not moving, not knocking, not calling out, just standing, watching. The streetlight caught the side of her face, the faintest curl of her lips, a smile that made my stomach twist. She stood there for almost 2 full minutes before walking slowly toward the corner and disappearing from view. I replayed the clip 3 times, each time hoping I was wrong, that maybe it was a neighbor, a stranger passing through. But the way she turned her head, the way she paused like she wanted me to see her, it was her. I called the police again. The dispatcher knew my name before I finished it. They sent a car to patrol the block, but by the time the officers arrived, she was gone. After they left, I locked every window and sat in my son's room until the first hints of dawn. Watching him sleep, I felt a new kind of fury settle in my chest. If she wanted to play this like a game, I was done playing defense. I was going to make sure the next time she came near my home, it would be the last. The next morning, I didn't waste time. Sleep had been a luxury I couldn't afford, and I was running on adrenaline and black coffee. My first call wasn't to a friend or the police. It was to a private investigator. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice steady, like he'd heard 1,000 stories that started just like mine. When I told him what had been happening, there was no hesitation in his tone. I'll take the case, but if she's family, you need to be ready for what I might find. I'm already ready, I said, even though my stomach churned. By noon, he was in my living room, flipping through stills from the security footage. He took notes, asked precise questions, and never once looked at me with pity. That alone made me trust him more than anyone I'd spoken to in weeks. He set up discreet motion sensors near the back fence, devices smaller than my palm, and installed a hidden camera in the hedge by the driveway. If she steps within 30 feet of your property, we'll know. When he left, I stood in the hallway, listening to the quiet hum of the baby monitor. My son was still napping, his small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. I thought about how oblivious he was to all of this, and how fiercely I wanted to keep it that way. That night, the investigator called. If she's bold enough to stand outside your house, she's bold enough to try again soon. Don't leave your son alone for a second. The warning settled into me like a stone. I made a decision then. I wasn't just going to protect my son from her. I was going to make sure she could never come near us again. And if that meant dragging every secret, every piece of dirt she'd buried into the light, so be it. It happened 2 nights later. The investigator had warned me she might show up again, but I wasn't prepared for how fast my heart would start pounding when the alert came through on my phone. Motion detected. Backyard. I grabbed the phone, tapped the feed, and there she was, my mother-in-law, standing under the faint yellow glow of the porch light, her face turned toward my son's bedroom window. She wasn't moving, just watching. The PI's voice came through my earpiece. We'd set up a live connection in case this exact moment happened. "Don't go outside," he said.
Stay with your son. I'm on my way. I ran to the nursery. My son was still asleep, tiny fists curled near his cheeks. I stood there, my body between him and the window, my ears straining for any sound beyond the hum of the baby monitor. Through the blinds, I caught glimpses of her pacing. She looked thinner than I remembered, her movements twitchy, almost frantic. A shadow passed over her face, and then she stepped toward the side gate. 5 minutes later, headlights swept across the yard. The PI's door truck slammed, and I heard his voice, low and firm. She froze, like a deer in the road. Then came the words I'd been waiting to hear for weeks. "Ma'am, you're trespassing. Step away from the house." She tried to argue, but the cameras had already caught everything. The stalking, the repeated visits, the proximity to the nursery window. It was evidence, clear and undeniable. When she finally left, escorted down the driveway, I sank into the rocking chair by my son's crib. My legs were shaking so badly I could barely stand. This wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, I knew I had the upper hand.
Filing for a restraining order felt like both a victory and a betrayal. She was still family, after all, my husband's mother, but after that night, there was no denying she had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and floor polish. I clutched the stack of printed photos and time-stamped video stills, my hands sweating despite the cold air conditioning. The clerk glanced at the evidence, her lips tightening just slightly before she handed me the forms. "Fill these out. Be specific." Specific? How do you reduce months of fear into bullet points? How do you write down in neat black ink that the woman who once knitted your son a blanket was caught standing under his window at midnight? When the hearing date came, she showed up in a pale blue dress, her hair neatly pinned as if she were going to church. She didn't look at me, not once. Instead, she kept whispering to my husband, who sat at the end of the bench, shoulders tense, jaw locked. The judge was patient but firm. "Why were you at your daughter-in-law's home in the middle of the night?" Her answer was a rehearsed sigh. "I was worried. I thought the baby might be in danger from her." She nodded in my direction, her voice soft but dripping with accusation. That was the moment I realized. This wasn't just obsession. It was something older, deeper. She wanted to paint me as unfit, unstable. The harm she meant for my son wasn't just physical. It was about control. When the judge granted the temporary order, her face didn't crack, but my husband's did. A flicker of something I couldn't name. Shame? Guilt? Or maybe the first shadow of the truth he'd been avoiding. 2 days before the final hearing, I went into the attic to pull down a box of winter clothes for my son. The air up there was dry and dusty, filled with the faint smell of cedar and insulation. I was halfway through sorting sweaters when I found a small floral tin wedged behind a stack of old photo albums. It wasn't mine. Inside were letters, yellowed, folded in careful thirds, some written in my mother-in-law's looping cursive, others in a man's tighter, slanted hand I didn't recognize. The earliest dated back nearly 30 years. The first one I opened wasn't even addressed to her. It was to her husband. It talked about keeping the family line clean and avoiding outsiders. My stomach turned. Letter after letter made the same themes painfully clear. She has always been obsessed with appearances, heritage, and purity. It wasn't just dislike. It was a deep, ugly prejudice that had apparently survived decades. And then I found the newer pages, notes written after our wedding. She's changing him. He's slipping away from us. The baby will be hers, not ours. The most recent note was barely 2 months old. I'll find a way to protect him from her. The handwriting was sharp, almost carved into the paper. I sat there, my hand shaking, the edges of the pages cutting into my skin. This wasn't just a grudge. This was a mission she had set for herself. I realized then that her midnight visits, her constant undermining, the way she'd slip subtle questions to my son, it all connected.
She didn't just want me gone, she wanted to erase me entirely, even from my own child's life. The tin felt heavier than it should as I closed it. I knew these letters would change everything in court. But a part of me also knew that whatever the judge decided, there was no undoing the knowledge I now carried. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, its beige walls and humming fluorescent lights making everything feel both mundane and suffocating. My lawyer sat to my right, tapping her pen quietly against her notepad. Across from us, my mother-in-law was a picture of composure. Hair perfectly styled, pearl earrings gleaming, lips pressed into that thin, unreadable line I'd seen 100 times before. The judge asked for evidence to be presented. My lawyer gave a small nod to me, and I reached into my bag, pulling out the floral tin. I placed it on the table between us with deliberate slowness, letting the faint scrape of metal against wood carry across the room. "These," I said, my voice steady, despite the thundering in my chest, "are letters written over the span of 30 years. They include statements about removing me from my son's life and keeping him from what she called outside influences." The judge gestured for me to proceed. I read one of the newer notes aloud, the one with the words carved into the paper, "I'll find a way to protect him from her." For the first time since this began, my husband's eyes lifted from the table. His face paled, as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. I watched him turn toward his mother, searching her face for denial, for some explanation, but she didn't flinch. She just sat there, still and silent, her hands folded neatly in her lap. My lawyer handed the letters to the judge, who leafed through them with a growing frown. The room felt colder. Every breath seemed louder. My mother-in-law's attorney shifted uncomfortably, whispering something urgent into her ear, but she didn't respond. In that moment, it wasn't about winning custody or proving who was right. It was about finally having the truth out in the open, the kind that couldn't be softened by charm or hidden behind family dinners. And judging by the look on my husband's face, that truth had already done more damage than any ruling could.
The judge leaned back in his chair, the stack of letters resting on his desk like a weight that had just shifted the air in the room. His gaze moved slowly from me to my husband, then to my mother-in-law, as though measuring each of us against something only he understood. "These letters are troubling," he began, his voice even but edged with something colder. "They show a clear intent to undermine the mother's role in her child's life. However," he paused, the word hanging in the air like a pause in a storm, "custody is not determined by past intentions alone. It is determined by the present and the child's best interests." I felt my stomach drop. My lawyer's pen froze mid-note. The judge continued, "Given the animosity between the parties, full custody to either parent may inflame tensions. I am ordering shared custody with strict boundaries. The grandmother is to have no unsupervised contact with the child." It wasn't the clean victory I had imagined, the kind where my son and I would simply walk away from this toxic web. Instead, it was a tightrope, one I'd have to walk every day, knowing she was still out there, watching, waiting. My mother-in-law didn't blink. She simply adjusted her pearl earring and folded her hands again, as if nothing had been decided at all. My husband's shoulders sagged in relief, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. As we left the courtroom, the hallway felt too bright, the echoes of our footsteps too sharp. My lawyer leaned in and whispered, "It's not over. Orders can be changed." I knew she was right. This wasn't the end. It was just the first round in a fight I hadn't wanted but now couldn't avoid. And somewhere behind me, I could feel my mother-in-law's presence, like a shadow stretching long across the floor, patient and unyielding.
The first night back home after the hearing was eerily quiet. My son was asleep upstairs, his breathing a soft, steady rhythm through the baby monitor. I should have felt safe, the way you're supposed to feel when a court order puts distance between you and a threat. But instead, I found myself double-checking the locks, testing the alarm, peering out the window at every passing car. Around 10 p.m., the doorbell rang. The sound jolted through me like an electric shock. I froze, phone in hand, before walking slowly toward the door. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but darkness. No figure, no movement, just the faint glow of the porch light on the empty steps. When I opened the door, there was no one there. But on the welcome mat lay a small folded piece of paper. My hand trembled as I picked it up. Inside, in handwriting I recognized instantly, were just 5 words. He needs a real family. The paper smelled faintly of her perfume, that heavy floral scent she wore every Sunday. My chest tightened. She had been here. She had stood on my porch, steps away from my sleeping child, despite every order, every morning. I wanted to call the police immediately, but something in me hesitated. I knew what they'd say. Without witnesses, without cameras catching her, it was just a piece of paper. A coincidence, a misunderstanding. Instead, I slid the note into a plastic bag, sealing it like evidence. My lawyer's words from earlier echoed in my mind. It's not over. Upstairs, my son shifted in his crib, letting out a small sigh. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring up into the darkness, and realized something I hadn't fully admitted before. This wasn't just about custody anymore. This was about survival. Mine and his. By morning, the unease from the night before had hardened into resolve. Fear wasn't going to keep me frozen anymore, not when my son's safety was at stake. After dropping him off at daycare, I drove straight to a small electronics store 2 towns over, the kind of place where the cashier doesn't ask questions about why you're buying half a dozen hidden cameras and motion sensors. Back home, I walked through the house with a new kind of focus. One camera above the front door, tucked under the eaves. Another in the hallway, angled toward the stairs. A tiny one disguised as a photo frame in the living room. I even placed one in the baby's room, not to watch him, but to see if anyone ever tried to get near him when I wasn't there. The setup took hours, but when it was done, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. For the first time, it wasn't just my word against hers. Now I'd have proof. That night, after my son was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the small monitor that displayed all the camera feeds. Every creak of the house made my pulse jump, but I stayed there, watching. At 1:17 a.m., movement flickered on the screen. The front porch camera. A shadow moved into frame, then the unmistakable shape of her, standing just beyond the door, hands fidgeting with something in her coat pocket. She didn't ring the bell this time. Instead, she leaned toward the door, pressing her ear to it, as if listening for signs of life inside. My hand hovered over my phone, ready to call the police, but I waited. I wanted her to give me something undeniable. Then she pulled a small vial from her pocket, glanced around, and poured its contents along the base of the door. My stomach twisted. Whatever this was, it wasn't just a visit.
By the time she vanished back into the night, my hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the monitor. I waited another 5 minutes, staring at the empty porch, before finally creeping toward the door. The faint, bitter smell hit me first, sharp and chemical, like something that didn't belong anywhere near a home, let alone near where my child slept. I pulled my phone from my pocket and with one hand recorded a video of the thin, wet line glistening at the base of the door. My other hand held a paper towel, which I used to dab at the liquid. The fabric soaked it up in seconds, and the smell intensified, clawing at my throat. In the kitchen, I sealed the paper towel inside a plastic freezer bag and labeled it with the date and time. My plan was clear now. I would take it to a friend who worked at a local lab in the morning. If I was going to confront her, or worse, involve the police, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, calm and deliberate, as she poured whatever poison this was onto my front step. My mind replayed every visit she'd made, every accidental spill or odd comment about my son's health. I'd been so close to dismissing my instincts, so close to convincing myself I was paranoid. By dawn, I was already dressed and waiting in the car, the bagged evidence sitting on the passenger seat like a silent witness. When my friend called with the results later that afternoon, her voice was tight. "It's pesticide," she said, "the industrial kind. Not something you'd have around the house, and definitely not safe for a child." It was the confirmation I didn't want and the proof I needed. I sat in my car outside the house for a long time, holding the bag of evidence in my lap. My fingers kept tracing the edge of the plastic, as if the crinkling sound might somehow tell me what to do next. The obvious choice was the police, and part of me wanted nothing more than to walk into the station, slam this bag onto the counter, and watch the shock ripple across their faces. But the other part of me, the one that had spent years dealing with her manipulations, knew she was too careful, too skilled at twisting a story until she came out looking like the victim. If I went now, she could deny everything. She'd say the smell was just cleaning fluid, that she had spilled it by accident. And without catching her in the act, I risked losing control of the whole narrative. So I decided on something harder. I would wait. I would set up my own trap. The next time she tried this, I'd be ready, with more than just a residue sample. That night, after tucking my son into bed, I positioned a small camera above the porch light. It was angled low, its lens barely noticeable under the housing. I tested the feet twice, watching myself step in and out of frame until I was sure it caught everything from the walkway to the door. Then I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my sleeping boy through the monitor, and made myself a promise. Whatever it took, I would protect him, even if it meant staring into the eyes of the woman who had tried to kill him and not flinching. I didn't have to wait long. The footage was clear enough that even she couldn't talk her way around it. I sat there in the glow of my phone screen, watching frame by frame as my mother-in-law twisted open the cap, poured the contents along the porch railing where my son liked to run his hands, then glanced around before slipping the bottle back into her coat. It was almost surreal. There she was, the woman who had held him as a newborn, who had smiled for photos at his first birthday, moving like a stranger in the night with poison in her hand. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt this deep, steady certainty settle inside me, the kind of certainty that tells you there's no going back. The next morning, I didn't call her. I didn't drive over. I went straight to the police with the footage and the sample from that first night. They didn't rush me. They didn't promise instant justice, but they took it seriously. They told me it would go to the DA, that she would be questioned, that I had done the right thing. When I got home, my son was sitting at the kitchen table, legs swinging under the chair, eating cereal. He looked up at me with that easy, trusting smile, and I realized that this was the only thing that mattered. Not revenge, not her shame, just him. Safe. She's gone now. Not in prison, at least not yet, but gone from our lives. No visits, no phone calls, no chance to twist her way back in. My husband hasn't spoken to her since, and for once, I don't carry the weight of convincing him. The truth was there in the light of the screen, undeniable. People say family is everything, but sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is close the door and never open it again. I always thought the worst thing in life was watching your child suffer. Turns out there's something far worse, knowing they're in danger but having no right to say it out loud. That evening, sitting at the kitchen table in his wife's house, I watched him slowly sip his tea, his hands trembling just a little.
He caught my glance and, as if to reassure me, said, "Just tired, Mom." But I knew it wasn't fatigue. It was the same pale, washed-out look his father had before they took him to the hospital. The clock on the wall ticked inside its golden frame, while from the other room I could hear the soft laughter of his wife and her mother. There was something cold in that laughter. Back then, I didn't yet know what they had done, but for the first time in my life, one thought gripped me. If I'm wrong, I'll lose my family. If I'm right, I'll lose everything else. It started with little things, the kind you almost feel guilty for noticing. A phone call that ended the second I walked into the room. The way my son's wife would glance at her mother before answering even the simplest question. At first, I told myself it was just me being overprotective, clinging to the boy I'd raised for 32 years. He had a new life now, a new family. I wasn't supposed to interfere. But then, during a Sunday dinner, I saw her pour him a drink and press the glass into his hand, watching until he took the first sip. Her mother's eyes were on him too, calm but unblinking, like they were waiting for something to happen. He didn't notice. He laughed at something on the TV, but his laugh sounded thinner than I remembered. That night, lying in my own bed, the image of those two women, smiling just a little too long, wouldn't leave my mind. And deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I knew this wasn't just me imagining things. The first real scare came 2 weeks later. I'd stopped by unannounced, carrying a bag of groceries like any other mother would. My son was home alone, or so I thought. He was slumped on the couch, pale and sweating, his shirt damp against his skin. "You okay?" I asked, setting the bag down. He forced a smile, said it was just a stomach bug. But then I noticed the half-empty glass on the coffee table and a small white pill dissolving at the bottom. Before I could ask, the front door opened. His wife and her mother walked in, their voices bright with practiced cheer. The moment they saw me, that brightness flickered, just for a second, into something sharper. "Oh, you're here," his wife said, too quickly. Her mother's eyes went to the glass, then back to me, a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, as if to warn me not to ask. I didn't. Not then. I sat there, smiling, listening to their small talk, feeling the room close in around me. My son excused himself to lie down, and I stayed a few more minutes before leaving. But the whole drive home, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles ached. Whatever was happening in that house, I knew I had just seen a piece of it, and I couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that glass, the white pill swirling like it was alive. By morning, I had made up my mind. If I couldn't confront them directly, I'd have to start quietly collecting pieces of the puzzle. I began with the pharmacy. I bumped into the clerk at the grocery store, a young woman with kind eyes, and casually asked if she knew my daughter-in-law's mother. Her expression changed, just slightly, but enough for me to notice. She told me she couldn't give out personal information, but her pause before speaking was answer enough. Next, I called an old friend who still worked at the local clinic. I didn't tell her everything, just asked if certain prescription names sounded familiar. They did. Too familiar. The same drugs my friend said were sometimes used in cases of slow poisoning. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table, staring at my hands. Part of me wanted to drive straight to my son's house and drag him out, but another part knew that without proof, I'd only push him further toward them. I had to be patient, careful, strategic, even if it meant acting like nothing was wrong while the clock kept ticking louder in my head. I waited for the right moment, knowing I couldn't just blurt it out over coffee. The chance came on a Tuesday evening when my son stopped by to return a set of tools. He looked tired, his shirt untucked, a faint shadow under his eyes. I offered him dinner, something I knew he liked, We sat at my small kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the pauses. I kept my tone light, asking about work, about the weather, about anything except what I really wanted to say. Then, between bites, I slipped it in. "You've seemed different lately. Everything okay at home?" He froze for a second, just long enough for me to notice, before forcing a smile. "Yeah, Mom, just busy." He pushed his plate away, appetite gone. I wanted to press, to tell him I'd seen the pill, that I'd heard things, but the wall was already up. He changed the subject, and I let him, because if I pushed too hard now, I'd lose what little access I still had. Still, as he left, I caught that same faint tremor in his hand when he reached for his keys, and it told me more than his words ever could. It was pure chance that I overheard them. I'd dropped by to deliver a pie, an excuse, really, to see him. The front door was slightly ajar, and from the porch, I could hear voices drifting from the kitchen. I was about to knock when I caught my daughter-in-law's low, sharp tone. "He's getting weaker," she said. Then her mother's voice followed, smoother, colder. "Good. The lawyer said once it's finalized, we don't need him around for the transfer." My heart stopped. I pressed myself against the siding, barely breathing. There was the sound of a cabinet closing, then Rebecca again. "He still trusts me. He doesn't suspect a thing." Margaret chuckled softly, a sound I'll never forget, and added, "Just keep giving him the supplements. By the time anyone notices, it'll be too late." My hands were trembling so badly, I thought the pie would slip from them. I backed away from the door as quietly as I could, my pulse pounding in my ears. By the time I reached my car, I could barely start the engine. I'd suspected before, but this was confirmation. The problem was, I had no recording, no witness, just the weight of their words in my memory, and I knew they'd deny everything if I confronted them. I spent that night sitting at my kitchen table, the pie untouched on the counter, going over every possible move. If I stormed in and told my son what I'd heard, he'd run straight to her, and she'd twist it into another story about his paranoid mother. I'd lose him, and they'd win. No, I needed something solid, something they couldn't talk their way out of. The next morning, I dug out an old spiral notebook and started making a list. Names of people who'd been around them lately, dates when I'd seen him looking sick, any detail that might matter. I even wrote down the brands of pills I'd glimpsed in their kitchen cabinet months ago, just in case. Then I started quietly asking around. The pharmacist clerk, the mailman, an old neighbor. They all had tiny scraps of information, nothing that screamed danger on its own, but together they began to form a shadowy outline. A late-night package delivered from out of state, a large bank transfer into an account with Rebecca's maiden name, and every time I thought about stopping, I'd see my son's pale face in my mind, hear that tremor in his laugh. I didn't know how much time we had left, but I was certain of one thing. I had to move before they did. The opportunity came on a gray Saturday morning. I knew Rebecca volunteered at a charity shop on weekends, and Margaret usually went with her. My son was supposed to be at work, which meant the house would be empty. I drove over, my heart thudding so loudly I was afraid the neighbors could hear it. Their driveway was clear. I knocked once, just in case, then let myself in with the spare key my son had given me years ago, back when trust between us was effortless. The air inside was stale, faintly sweet, like overripe fruit. I moved quickly, starting in the kitchen. The pill bottles were still there, lined up neatly in a cabinet above the sink, labels facing forward. Most were vitamins, but 3 had the names scratched off.
I slipped them into my coat pocket. In the pantry, I found a small box taped shut, marked only with a date, 2 weeks from now. I wanted to open it, but something in me whispered that I might need to leave it untouched for now to avoid tipping them off. Upstairs in the master bedroom, a folder sat on the dresser, half hidden under a scarf. Inside were bank documents, withdrawals, account changes, all in my son's name, but with signatures that didn't look like his. My hands shook as I photographed each page with my phone. I'd barely made it back to the hallway when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel outside. They were home early. My pulse spiked as I slipped out the back door and into the yard, circling around to my car like I'd just arrived.
The moment I saw Margaret's face through the car window, I knew she suspected something. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just stared, her eyes narrowed, as if she could read the guilt right off my skin. Rebecca, on the other hand, put on her usual mask of polite surprise. "Oh, Elaine! What a coincidence," she called, stepping out of the passenger seat with a bright grin that didn't reach her eyes. "We were just coming back for lunch. Did you need something?" I forced my voice steady, holding up a bag of groceries I'd grabbed from my back seat as a prop. "Thought I'd drop these off. Heard Matt's been working late. Figured he could use some extra food around." Margaret's gaze flicked to the bag, then back to me, and I could feel her measuring every word, every movement. "That's thoughtful," she said slowly, her tone flat. My son's car wasn't in the driveway, but I didn't ask where he was. It would have been too obvious I was fishing. I handed the bag to Rebecca, made some excuse about an appointment, and left. But as I drove away, my chest tightened with a new kind of fear. I'd crossed the Rhine today and I knew it. If they figured out I'd been inside that house without them, I wasn't just a nuisance anymore. I was a threat. And people like them didn't let threats linger for long.
The first sign came that evening. I called my son like I always did on Saturdays, but this time his phone went straight to voicemail. No ring, no delay, just the automated voice telling me to leave a message. I tried again an hour later, same thing. By Sunday afternoon, I was pacing the living room, phone in hand, when Rebecca finally texted, "Matt's been really tired. We're letting him rest. Please don't come by. It stresses him out." The words hit like a fist. Don't come by. In all the years I'd been his mother, no one had ever told me that before. I typed back, "Tell him I love him," but the message showed "read" with no reply. The next morning, I stopped by his workplace. His supervisor said Nat had called in sick for the next few days. My gut twisted. He never missed work without a good reason. That night, as I sat in the dark with only the hum of the refrigerator for company, it hit me. They weren't just trying to keep me out of his life. They were closing ranks, making sure no one else saw him either. And if they were moving this fast, then whatever they were planning was coming soon. I had to find a way in before it was too late. By Tuesday, my patience had run out. Every unanswered call, every clipped text from Rebecca felt like another lot clicking into place between me and my son. I told myself I'd just drive by, maybe catch him outside. But I knew before I even left the house that I wasn't going to stop at the curb. Their cars were in the driveway when I pulled up, which meant I'd have to face them. I walked to the front door with a calm I didn't feel, my fingers clenched around the pie plate I'd grabbed as an excuse. Rebecca opened the door, her smile brittle. "Elaine, I told you," she started, but I stepped forward before she could finish. "I'm here to see my son," I said, my voice low but steady. Margaret appeared behind her, arms crossed, her gaze sharp enough to cut. "He's sleeping," she said flatly. "You can come back another time." I didn't move. "Then I'll wait." For a long moment, no one spoke. The air was thick, the kind of silence that dares you to break it. Finally, Rebecca sighed, stepped aside, and let me in. The house felt colder than usual, and from upstairs I thought I heard the faintest cough. I followed the sound, my pulse pounding. knowing this might be my only chance.
I found him sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. The room was dim, curtains drawn, even though it was midday. When he looked up, my heart sank. His skin was ashen, lips dry, eyes glazed like he'd been drifting in and out of sleep for days. "Mom?" His voice was hoarse, like it hadn't been used in a while. I sat beside him, trying to hide the tremor in my hands. "Matt, what's going on? You look bad." He tried to smile, but it faltered. "Just tired. Becky's been helping me rest. She says I've been working too much." I glanced at the nightstand and saw a small glass of water next to an amber pill bottle with no label. My chest tightened. "What are these?" I asked. But before he could answer, the doorway darkened. Margaret stood there, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Those are vitamins. He needs his rest, Elaine. You've done enough visiting for today." I met her stare, neither of us blinking. My son looked between us, confused, and in that moment I knew I had to get him out of here soon. But leaving with him today would be impossible. They were watching every move I made.
That night, I sat in my car 2 blocks from their house, engine off, lights out, staring at the faint glow of their upstairs window. Every instinct in me screamed that if I left him there much longer, I might never get him back. But walking in and dragging him out wouldn't work. They'd block me, call the police, twist the story until I was the unstable one. I needed a plan that made it look like I had no plan at all. I thought about his routines, the few places he still went without them. There was one, his doctor's office. He had a checkup scheduled for the following Thursday. If I could get there before they did, intercept him in the parking lot, I could drive him straight to my house, or better yet, out of town. I'd need clothes for him, his ID, any paperwork that proved his bank accounts and medical records, and I'd need to be ready for them to come after us. The idea of facing Rebecca and Margaret directly made my stomach twist, but losing my son was worse. I wrote everything down in the old spiral notebook, even the things I didn't want to imagine, like calling the police if they tried to stop us. By the time I closed the notebook, I knew exactly what I had to do. 2 days before the doctor's appointment, I started gathering what I'd need. I packed a duffel bag with a change of clothes for Matt, some toiletries, copies of important documents I'd kept over the years, his birth certificate, an old passport, even his high school diploma. I hid the bag in the trunk of my car beneath a blanket. Every movement felt like a countdown, every zipper and folded shirt a step closer to the point of no return. I even filled the gas tank and stashed a roll of cash in the glove compartment, just in case. That evening, as I was locking my front door, I noticed a car idling across the street. A dark sedan, windows tinted too heavily for our small town. It didn't belong to any of my neighbors. I stood there a moment longer than I should have, pretending to fumble with my keys, hoping for a glimpse of the driver. But the moment I turned toward it, the car pulled away slowly, without headlights, disappearing down the street. My gut told me exactly what it was. Margaret's way of letting me know she was watching, that she knew I was moving closer. It wasn't just Matt who was in danger now. If I made one wrong move, I could end up silenced before I ever reached him.
Thursday came heavy with rain, the kind that blurred the edges of the world and made everything feel slower, heavier. I left my house an hour earlier than I needed to, the duffel bag in the trunk and my heart pounding so hard it made my hands shake on the steering wheel. The plan was simple. Get to the doctor's office before them, wait for Matt in the parking lot, and get him in my car before Rebecca or Margaret could react. I pulled into the lot and chose a spot with a clear view of the entrance. My wipers beat a steady rhythm as I scanned every car that pulled in. 20 minutes passed before I saw their SUV. But my relief curdled when I realized it wasn't just Rebecca and Matt. It was Margaret in the passenger seat, her eyes already sweeping the lot. I slid lower in my seat, praying the rain-smeared windshield would keep me hidden. Matt looked pale, his posture slumped, as Rebecca helped him out of the car. They were walking him in between them, like two guards escorting a prisoner. My window of opportunity was shrinking fast. If I waited until they were inside, I'd lose him. If I moved now, I'd have to face him head on. My hand was already on the door handle when Margaret's gaze locked onto mine through the glass. Even from that distance, I could see the smile spread across her face, slow, knowing, and full of warning.
My fingers tightened around the door handle until they hurt. There was no more hiding. Margaret had seen me, and the longer I sat there, the more control I handed to them. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the rain, the cold soaking through my sweater in seconds. Rebecca's hand tightened on Matt's arm as I approached, her smile brittle. "Elaine, what a surprise," she said. The sweetness in her voice stretched thin. Matt turned toward me, confusion flickering in his tired eyes. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I forced a calm I didn't feel. "I was in the area, thought I'd check in on you." Margaret stepped forward, positioning herself between us like a shield. "He's fine. We're here for his appointment, and you're making him late." I ignored her, focusing on my son. "Can we talk? Just for a minute. Alone." He hesitated, and in that tiny gap, I reached for his hand. His skin was cold, his grip weak, but it was enough. "Matt, please, come with me." Rebecca's voice sharpened. "She's trying to upset you again. Let's go inside." I felt the moment slipping away, like sand through my fingers. If I backed down now, I might never get another chance. So I did the only thing left. I said, loud enough for them to hear, but looking only at him, "If you stay with them, I don't think I'll see you alive again." For a moment, the rain was the only sound, drumming on the hoods of cars and pooling at our feet. Matt's eyes darted between my face and theirs, searching for something. Truth, maybe, or a lie he could live with. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice unsteady. Rebecca gave a sharp laugh, too quick, too loud. "She's losing it, Matt. This is exactly what I warned you about." Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder, her tone syrupy and calm. "Don't let her fill your head with nonsense. You're safe with us." But he didn't look at them. He kept his gaze on me, and I saw the tiniest flicker of doubt cross his face. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Look at yourself, honey. You know something's wrong. You felt it." His brow furrowed, his lips pressing into a thin line. Rebecca's grip on his arm tightened, her knuckles whitening. "We're going inside, now." He didn't move. His eyes lingered on mine for another heartbeat, and in that silence I knew a seed had been planted. But seeds take time to grow, and time was the one thing we didn't have. I had to find a way to make him walk away with me today, or I might lose him for good. I could feel them closing in around him, their presence like walls pressing tighter with every second. If I didn't shatter the moment, they'd pull him inside and lock the door on any chance I had. My voice steadied, even though my heart was pounding so hard it hurt. "Matt, I know about the pills," I said, loud enough for the rain to carry my words to their ears. Rebecca's head snapped toward me, her smile vanishing. "What?" she spat. Margaret's expression didn't change. If anything, it became calmer, which somehow felt more dangerous. "The ones without labels," I continued, my eyes locked on my son's. "The ones that make you weak, foggy, too tired to think straight. I know where they came from, and I know why." His brow furrowed, confusion warring with fear. "Mom," he started, but Rebecca cut in, her voice sharp. "She's making things up. She's always hated me." I didn't look at her. "You felt it, haven't you? The way your body's been failing you? That's not work stress, Matt. That's them." The word hung in the air like a blade. Margaret stepped forward, her tone silky. "You need to leave now, Elaine." But I saw it, the hesitation in his eyes, the crack in the trust they'd built around him. It wasn't enough to save him yet, but it was enough to keep him from walking through that door. And for the first time, I thought, maybe, just maybe, I could win.
Matt's shoulders sagged, and for a long moment he just stood there in the rain, water dripping from his hair, his breath coming slow and heavy. Then, almost like he was testing the weight of his own decision, he said quietly, 5 minutes. I'll talk to her for 5 minutes. Rebecca's grip on his arm tightened so hard I saw him wince. You don't need to do this, she snapped, but there was an edge of panic in her voice now. Margaret's calm finally cracked. Her eyes narrowed and her jaw clenched as she stepped aside just enough to let him pass. I didn't wait. I slipped my arm around him, guiding him toward my car before they could change their minds. My heart was a drum in my chest, each step feeling like it might be the one where they lunged forward and yanked him back. We reached the car and I opened the passenger door, ushering him in before circling to my side. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I saw them watching us. Rebecca with her arms crossed tight, Margaret standing utterly still, her expression unreadable. 5 minutes, Matt repeated as I started the engine. I nodded, forcing a calm smile, even though my only thought was this. If I drove away now, there was no going back, and I had no intention of returning him to them.
The moment the tires rolled out of the lot, I took a left instead of the right turn that would have led back toward his house. Matt noticed immediately. "Mom, the clinic's the other way." My hands tightened on the wheel, eyes fixed on the slick, winding road ahead. "We're not going to the clinic," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "We're getting you somewhere safe." His head turned sharply toward me, confusion flashing into something sharper. Fear, maybe, or the first flicker of understanding. "What are you talking about? I told them I'd be back in 5 minutes." I shook my head. "If we go back, I'm afraid I'll lose you, and not in the way you think." Rain pelted the windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. In the passenger seat, he shifted uncomfortably, glancing in the side mirror. "They'll call the police," he said. "Let them," I replied. "I have proof, or at least enough to start getting it. You just need to trust me for a little while longer." His breathing was shallow, rapid, like he was trying to piece together every strange thing from the last few months. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. This is about them, isn't it? Becky and her mom?" I didn't answer right away, but my silence told him everything. We'd barely gone 3 miles when I caught the glint of headlights in the side mirror. Too steady, too close, matching every turn I made. At first I told myself it was just another driver on a wet Thursday afternoon, but my gut said otherwise. The shape of the vehicle was impossible to miss. A dark SUV, the same one they'd driven to the clinic. My pulse spiked, and I eased my foot down on the accelerator, not enough to draw attention, but enough to see if they'd keep pace. They did. Matt noticed it too. "Mom, that's them." His voice was tight, the reality finally breaking through whatever denial was left. "What are you doing?" I kept my eyes on the road, trying to make sure we get somewhere they can't follow. The wipers thrashed faster as the rain came down harder, each streak on the glass making it harder to see. The SUV closed the gap, their headlights flaring in my mirror like a threat. I turned down a side road I knew well, narrow, lined with trees, leading toward the old highway. My hands gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. "Buckle your seatbelt," I told him. He didn't argue this time. Somewhere behind us, I thought I saw the faint outline of Margaret in the passenger seat, her face calm as stone. That calm was worse than rage. It meant she thought she still had the upper hand. I knew these back roads like the lines in my own palms. Decades of school drop-offs, late-night grocery runs, and Sunday drives had etched them into my memory. The SUV stayed close as we wound through the trees, their headlights slicing through the curtain of rain. I took a sudden right onto a narrow gravel road that most people avoided. Too many blind curves, too easy to lose control if you didn't know where the dips were. Matt gripped the armrest, eyes flicking between me and the rearview mirror. "They're still coming," he said, his voice taut. I didn't answer. Instead, I pushed the car a little faster, feeling the tires crunch and slide under us. At the next fork, I veered left, a route that would loop us around toward the old train yard.
The SUV hesitated for a moment, just a second, but then followed. My chest tightened. Margaret was smarter than I'd hoped. Up ahead, a fallen branch lay half across the road, slick with rain. I swerved around it, my heart hammering, and glanced at the mirror just in time to see them slow, tires skidding slightly before they regained control. It wasn't much, but it gave me a few precious seconds, enough to reach the train yard gate and slip through the gap in the fence before their headlights reappeared. I killed my lights and rolled to a stop, the sound of rain on the roof deafening in the sudden stillness.
The train yard was a skeleton of its old self. Rusted boxcars lined up like forgotten tombstones, weeds curling through cracked asphalt. I pulled the car between two derelict freight containers, shutting off the engine completely. The sudden silence made the rain seem louder, every drop on the roof a sharp tick of the clock. Matt sat rigid beside me, his breath shallow, eyes locked on the sliver of road visible through the gap in the containers. "Do you think they saw us?" he whispered. I shook my head, though I wasn't sure. Then came the low rumble of tires on wet gravel. Headlights swept across the far end of the yard, slicing through the gray. I held my breath as the SUV crept past, moving slow, deliberate, like a predator certain its prey was near. The beam of light skimmed over the edge of the container beside us, brightening for a heartbeat before sliding away. My pulse pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Matt's hand tightened around the edge of his seat. The SUV lingered at the intersection ahead, brake lights glowing red through the rain. Then finally it rolled forward, turning toward the main road until the sound of its engine faded into the storm. We stayed frozen for another minute, maybe two, just in case. When I finally exhaled, my hands were trembling against the steering wheel. We'd bought ourselves a little time, but not enough to be careless.
"There's a place they won't think to look," I said finally, my voice low but firm. Matt turned toward me, rainwater still glistening on his hair. "Where?" I started the engine, keeping the headlights off as I eased us toward the far side of the yard. "An old cabin. Belonged to your father's cousin. No one's been there in years, and I never told Becky about it." The tires crunched over loose gravel, the sound almost swallowed by the steady roar of the rain. Matt stared ahead, his jaw tight. "Mom, if what you're saying is true, how long have you known?" I hesitated, my fingers tightening on the wheel. "Long enough to know you were in danger, not long enough to have every piece of proof." He didn't answer, but I could feel the questions building in him. I took the service road out of the yard, looping us onto a forgotten stretch of highway that ran parallel to the interstate. The world outside was all blurred trees and fogged windows, but I could see the exit in my mind. Mile marker 142, the turn that would take us up into the hills. We had maybe 45 minutes before they figured out where we weren't and started guessing where we might be. And if they guessed right, we'd have no more second chances. "We'll get there, we'll get warm, and then I'll explain everything," I told him. "But right now, we just drive."
The cabin emerged from the trees like a ghost, weathered wood gone silver with age, the roof sagging in places, windows clouded from years of dust. I cut the engine and let the silence settle, broken only by the patter of rain on the tin awning over the porch. Matt stepped out first, pulling his jacket tighter against the chill. "You're sure no one knows about this place?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm sure," I said, though the certainty in my tone was stronger than the certainty I felt. The porch groaned under our weight as we crossed it, and the old brass key turned stiffly in the lock. The air inside was cool and dry, with that faint, musty smell of closed-up rooms. I flicked the light switch, but nothing happened. No electricity. "We'll have to use candles," I murmured, setting my bag down and digging through the drawers until I found a half-burned one and a box of matches. The tiny flame lit the room in soft gold, revealing a single worn sofa, a small table, and a wood stove in the corner. Matt lowered himself onto the couch, his eyes scanning the shadows. "So, now what?" I looked at him, really looked. At the dark circles under his eyes, the pale skin, the confusion that hadn't left his face since we'd left town. "Now," I said, "we figure out how to make sure they can't find you. And then, I tell you everything."
I sat across from him at the small table, the candlelight catching in the flecks of his tired eyes. For a moment, I didn't know where to start. How do you tell your child that the people he trusts most might be trying to kill him? I took a deep breath. Matt, everything I'm about to say is going to sound impossible, but I need you to listen before you decide I'm wrong. His shoulders tensed, but he nodded. I told him about the pill I'd seen dissolving in his glass, the overheard conversation on the porch, the pharmacy clerk's strange reaction, the bank documents with signatures that weren't his. I told him about the SUV following us, about the look in Margaret's eyes that first day she realized I suspected something. His face shifted as I spoke, first confusion, then disbelief, then something darker. You're saying Becky's trying to, what, hurt me? He asked. Not just her, I said quietly. Her mother too, and I think it's about the inheritance your grandfather left. He leaned back, shaking his head slowly. That's insane. Becky, she takes care of me. I leaned forward, my voice firm. She's making you sicker, Matt. You felt it. You know this isn't normal. His eyes dropped to the floor, his hands tightening into fists. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either.
Matt sat in silence for a long time, the candle flickering between us. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes, his mind sifting through memories he'd probably filed away as nothing at the time. There were days, he said finally, his voice low. Days when I'd wake up and feel like I hadn't slept at all, like I was swimming through mud. I thought it was work stress. He rubbed the back of his neck, staring past me. And that weekend in June, I was so dizzy I couldn't stand. Becky said it was dehydration, kept bringing me tea. I remember the taste being bitter, but I drank it anyway. His brow furrowed deeper. She never wanted me to go to the doctor alone, always insisted on coming with me, said she just wanted to help. But now, his voice trailed off and he pressed a hand to his forehead. God, Mom, if you're right. I reached across the table, my fingers closing over his. It's not about being right. It's about keeping you alive. The wind rattled the loose boards of the cabin, and somewhere outside, a branch snapped under the weight of the rain. He met my eyes then, the denial gone, replaced by something harder. Fear, yes, but also resolve. So what do we do now?
We stay here tonight, I said, glancing toward the dark windows, and in the morning, we head to the sheriff's office. I'll bring the pills, the photos, everything I've got. Once they open an investigation, you'll be safe. Matt nodded slowly, though I could see the unease in his eyes. And if they come here tonight? I didn't want to admit I'd thought of that too. Instead, I checked the locks on the front and back doors, then pushed the sofa against the entryway, more for my own peace of mind than real protection. I had just set the candle back on the table when Matt's gaze flicked toward the window. Mom, he whispered, his face pale. I turned and saw it. A faint glow through the trees, low and steady, like headlights idling in place. My pulse jumped. We both froze, listening, but the rain muffled any sound beyond the cabin walls. It could be nothing, I said, though my voice lacked conviction. The light shifted slightly, then disappeared, swallowed by the darkness. Matt swallowed hard. They know, don't they? I forced a deep breath, keeping my own fear buried for his sake. Maybe, but they're not getting in here without us knowing. What I didn't say was that if they'd found us once, they could find us again. And next time, they might not wait outside.
It was just after midnight when the sound woke me, a soft crunch of gravel outside, deliberate and unhurried. My eyes snapped open, and I saw Matt sitting up on the couch, his face tense in the candle's dying glow. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Another step, closer this time, followed by the faint metallic click of the gate latch. My stomach turned cold. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag and moved to the window, angling it just enough to peer through the narrow gap in the curtain. Two figures stood near the porch, huddled under a single umbrella. Even through the rain, I knew them. Rebecca's slim frame, Margaret's stiff, unmoving posture. They weren't knocking. They were just standing there, watching. Then Margaret took a step forward, her face tilting up toward the window like she could see me in the dark. The umbrella dipped slightly, and Rebecca's free hand brushed something metallic at her side, a glint that caught the light before vanishing again. My pulse roared in my ears. I turned to Matt. "We're leaving. Now." He didn't argue, just grabbed the duffel from the corner. Outside, the crunch of gravel started again, circling the cabin. We had minutes, maybe less, before the walls we thought were protecting us became a trap.
We slipped out the back door, the rain masking the sound of our steps as we crossed the overgrown yard. My flashlight beam stayed low, skimming the ground, careful not to betray our position. Matt moved ahead of me toward the tree line, the duffel slung over his shoulder. Behind us, the creak of the porch boards told me they'd entered the cabin. Good, it bought us precious seconds. We reached the old service path that wound down to the highway, my shoes sinking into the mud with every step. Somewhere behind, I thought I heard Rebecca call his name, her voice sharp and edged with something between anger and panic. We didn't stop. The slope leveled out, and through the trees, I caught the glint of my car, hidden where I'd left it earlier that day, just in case. We climbed in, our breaths quick and shallow, and I turned the key. The engine caught on the first try. No headlights, just a slow roll onto the empty highway, the darkness swallowing us whole. For miles, neither of us spoke. Only when the faint lights of the next town appeared on the horizon did Matt finally exhale, leaning back in his seat. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice raw. I glanced at him, my hand steady on the wheel. "You don't need to thank me. You're my son. I'd do it again." In the rearview mirror, there was nothing but black road and rain. For now, that was enough. I can tell you the exact moment my life split into before and after. It wasn't a fight or a letter or some dramatic confrontation in a public place. It was a laugh. A single short burst of laughter that slipped under a door I thought was locked to me forever. I had just come home early from work, rain soaking the back of my coat, my shoes squeaking on the hallway floor. The house smelled faintly of coffee and vanilla candles, my mother's favorite scent. I remember thinking how odd it was because she was supposed to be at her place across town. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard it. That laugh. Low, warm, familiar. My husband's laugh. But tangled up with it like two vines choking each other was hers. My mother's. My pulse stuttered. For a second, I thought maybe they were watching a movie, reminiscing about something from the past. That was the only explanation my mind would allow. My husband and my mother had always gotten along, maybe too well, but never in a way that set off alarms, until that second. I froze on the landing, listening. The laughter died, and in its place came a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. Then the faint, unmistakable sound of movement. Slow, deliberate. I told myself to keep walking, to push open the bedroom door and prove to myself I was paranoid. But my hand stayed frozen on the railing. Somewhere deep inside, I already knew what I was about to lose, and part of me wanted to delay that moment for as long as I could. I stood there on the landing for what felt like a full minute, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs the only sound anchoring me to reality. My hand tightened on the railing, the wood slick beneath my damp palm. I could still hear faint rustling from behind the bedroom door. Fabric against fabric, the creak of the mattress. My brain scrambled for innocent explanations. Maybe my mother was helping him change the sheets. Maybe she spilled something and they were cleaning it up together. But each theory fell apart as quickly as it formed.
My mother wasn't supposed to be here. My husband didn't know I'd be home until evening, and whatever was happening in that room was happening behind a locked door. I took one slow step toward it, my sock catching on the edge of the carpet, and in that moment, the noises stopped completely. Silence again, but this time it felt alert, like someone on the other side was holding their breath. My own breathing felt too loud, echoing in my ears. I turned away, forcing myself down the stairs before my courage or my self-control could break. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't say a word. But as I stepped back out into the rain, my pulse still hammering, I knew I'd crossed into unfamiliar territory. One where my husband's loyalty and my mother's love were no longer things I could take for granted.
That night, I barely slept. I lay on my side, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of my husband's breathing beside me. He was asleep within minutes, as if nothing had happened. No strange visit, no locked door, no silence heavy enough to crush a person. I wanted to ask him. I wanted to roll over, shake his shoulder, and demand to know why my mother had been there, why they'd locked themselves away. But my throat felt like it was closing, and the questions stayed trapped behind my teeth. Instead, I replayed the sound of their laughter over and over, each time hearing something darker in it, something I'd missed before. It wasn't the light, friendly laugh of family. It was intimate, too intimate. By morning, I had almost convinced myself to let it go, to believe my own carefully constructed lie that it was all just a misunderstanding. I made coffee, set his mug on the table, and watched him scroll through his phone like every other morning. When my mother called later, her voice was sweet, warm, and casual, as though the day before had been nothing more than ordinary. She didn't mention coming over. She didn't ask if I'd been home early. That omission stuck to me like static. It was the first small, undeniable confirmation that they were hiding something, and that they knew exactly what it was.
Over the next week, the pattern began to show itself, subtle at first, like a shadow in the corner of my vision. My mother started dropping by more often, always when I was at work or running errands. I'd come home to find an extra coffee mug in the sink, or a faint trace of her perfume lingering in the hallway upstairs. Once, I noticed the throw blanket from our couch folded neatly on the bed in the guest room, a room we almost never used. My husband brushed it off, saying she'd stopped in to borrow a book or bring over some leftovers. His tone was casual, his smile easy, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. I told myself not to overthink it, that I was being paranoid, maybe even jealous of the attention they gave each other. But deep down, something inside me had shifted. I started memorizing details, times she'd called, the exact moments she'd shown up, the small changes in his mood after she left. One night, I found myself standing in the dark kitchen, phone in hand, scrolling through security camera listings online. The idea of setting one up in my own home made my stomach turn, but so did the thought of living in a place where I had to guess what was real. I didn't buy one yet, but for the first time, I caught myself thinking like someone preparing for a war they hadn't admitted was coming.
It happened on a Thursday, the kind of day that already felt slightly off. I'd left work early because a storm was rolling in, and the thought of being stuck in traffic under that black sky made my chest tighten. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed his car there, which wasn't unusual, but the lights were on upstairs. In the bedroom, my stomach sank. I told myself it was fine. Maybe he was just taking a nap. Maybe he wasn't feeling well. But as I stepped inside, the air hit me like a wall. That same perfume, my mother's, hung heavy in the hallway. I froze in the entryway, every sense straining. There was faint music playing upstairs, something soft and old, the kind of jazz my mother liked to hum along to. I moved quietly, each step on the stairs slow and deliberate.
Halfway up, I caught it, a shadow crossing the narrow strip of light beneath the bedroom door. My pulse hammered in my ears. I could hear voices, low and muffled, then a breathless laugh. For a moment, my hand twitched toward the doorknob, ready to fling it open and end the guessing. But something stopped me. Not fear exactly, but a deep instinctive knowledge that whatever I saw would change me forever. I backed away, heart pounding, and left as silently as I'd come, the storm breaking overhead just as I reached my car.
That night, I stared at the ceiling again, my mind replaying every second from the moment I pulled into the driveway to the sound of that muffled laugh. The storm outside had passed, but inside me, the pressure was building. I realized I couldn't keep living in this half state where everything was suspicion, but nothing was proven. It was eating me alive. So the next morning, I did something I never thought I'd do in my own marriage. I started making a plan. At lunch, I drove to an electronics store 2 towns over, somewhere I knew no one would recognize me. I bought a small, motion-activated camera, the kind you could hide inside a bookshelf or behind a plant. My hand shook a little as I signed the receipt, my mind whispering that this wasn't who I was, that good wives and good daughters didn't spy on the people they loved, but good wives and good daughters also didn't live with the gnawing certainty that something ugly was happening just out of sight. That evening, I waited until my husband went for his run and my mother wasn't around. I set the camera up in the corner of the bedroom, angled so it would catch the bed and most of the room without being obvious. As I stepped back to look at it, I felt a strange mixture of guilt and relief. Guilt for crossing a line, relief for finally doing something to end this endless limbo. One way or another, I was gonna find out the truth.
2 days passed before I had the nerve to check the footage. I told myself I'd wait for something specific, a reason, but the truth was I was terrified of what I might see. That Friday evening, after my husband left to grab drinks with a coworker, I sat alone in the bedroom with my laptop. My hands hovered over the trackpad for a long moment before I finally opened the file. The video started in silence, just an empty room, daylight streaming through the blinds. For the first few hours, nothing happened, just the slow shifting of shadows as the sun moved across the floor. And then, just after 2 p.m., the door opened. My mother stepped inside. She wasn't carrying anything, not even her purse. She looked around slowly, as if checking to make sure she was alone, then walked to the bed and sat down. For a long minute, she just sat there, running her hand over the duvet in slow, absent motions. I leaned closer to the screen, my pulse spiking. Then she stood, crossed to the dresser, and opened the top drawer, his drawer. I watched as she took out one of his shirts, brought it to our face, and closed her eyes. My stomach turned. She stayed like that for several seconds before neatly folding it back and leaving the room. It wasn't proof, not in the way I needed, but it was enough to make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Whatever this was, it wasn't innocent.
That night, he came home earlier than usual, smelling faintly of the same cologne he always wore. But under it, I caught another scent. It wasn't perfume, not exactly, but it was hers, my mother's. He moved around the kitchen with an almost forced casualness, asking about my day, offering to make tea. I answered in short sentences, watching him. There was a faint tightness in his shoulders, a flicker in his eyes whenever I met his gaze. At one point, he leaned against the counter and said, "I think your mom dropped something by earlier. Did you see her?" My breath caught. The way he phrased it, too specific, too rehearsed, made something in my gut clench. I lied and said no, pretending to be distracted by the kettle. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on me a second too long, as if he were trying to read my mind. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I kept replaying the image of my mother with his shirt, the way she'd held it like it was something intimate. It was just enough to feel wrong,
but not enough to confront them. Not yet. That night, lying in bed beside him, I felt a gulf between us so wide I wasn't sure it could ever be crossed. And I realized with a cold, hollow certainty that both of them were now watching me, just as closely as I was watching them. The next week, I almost convinced myself to take the camera down. Living like this, waiting, watching, was exhausting. But something in me refused to let go. A quiet voice insisting I was close to the truth. On Wednesday afternoon, while I was at work, my phone buzzed with a notification from the camera app. Motion detected. My chest tightened as I slipped into the empty conference room and opened the feed. At first, I thought the angle was wrong. 2 figures stood near the window, partially in shadow. But as my eyes adjusted, I saw them clearly. My husband, my mother. She was laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting on his arm in a way that felt far too familiar. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in, speaking softly, his face just inches from hers. They stayed like that for a few long seconds before she stepped back, looking toward the door as if listening for someone. He said something else, and she smiled, slow, deliberate, before leaving the frame. He remained for a moment, staring after her, then sat on the bed and buried his face in his hands. My pulse roared in my ears. I replayed the clip 3 times, hoping I'd see some innocent explanation in the gesture, the expressions. But the more I watched, the more certain I became whatever was happening between them, it had crossed a line long ago.
I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her hand on his arm, the way they leaned toward each other like they were sharing a secret no one else could hear. By morning, something in me had hardened. I couldn't keep collecting fragments, half clues, moments that could be explained away if they wanted to lie well enough. I needed to see it with my own eyes, in real time. So I made a plan. I told my husband I had to work late on Friday, that a project deadline would keep me at the office until well past midnight. I said it casually over breakfast, not looking up from my coffee, as if it was nothing. He nodded, a little too quickly, like someone relieved to be given space. I spent the next 2 days perfecting the details, where I'd park so my car wouldn't be seen, how I'd slip into the house without making a sound, even how I'd time my arrival to catch them when they'd be most comfortable, most certain they were alone. And by Friday evening, my nerves felt electric, every muscle tight with anticipation. I sat in my car 2 streets away, watching the minutes crawl by on the dashboard clock. At 9:47 p.m., I saw the upstairs light flick on through the small gap in the curtains. My chest constricted. I knew this was it, the moment where everything could shatter, and I was ready to walk straight into it.
The house was dark when I slipped inside, the kind of darkness that feels intentional, like someone wanting privacy rather than absence. I didn't turn on any lights, letting my eyes adjust as I moved silently through the hallway. The only illumination came from upstairs, a warm, low glow spilling from the crack under the bedroom door. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every step up the staircase felt heavier than the last, my body torn between the urge to rush and the instinct to stop. Halfway up, I heard it. A soft murmur of voices, indistinct but intimate, the kind of tone you don't use for small talk. Then, a sound that made my stomach twist. A quiet, breathy laugh. Hers. My mother's. I reached the landing, my fingers brushing the doorframe as I steadied myself. For one suspended second, I thought about turning back, about leaving this moment unbroken so I could keep pretending. But then I pushed the door open just enough to see. They were sitting on the bed, close enough that their knees touched, his hand resting over hers. Her face was turned toward him, her expression soft in a way I'd never seen before, at least not toward me. My breath caught, too loud in the silence, and they both looked up at once. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then she withdrew her hand, and he stood too quickly, stammering something I couldn't hear over the rush of blood in my ears. I stepped inside fully, shutting the door behind me. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. The room felt smaller with the three of us in it, the air thick with something I couldn't name but could feel pressing against my skin. My husband tried to smile, a nervous twitch that only made him look guiltier. "You're home early," he said, his voice too light, too careful. My mother didn't speak at all. She just looked at me, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes unreadable. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence grow sharp. "I am," I finally said, my tone flacked. "Guess I didn't need to stay at work after all." He opened his mouth like he was about to explain, but I raised a hand to stop him. "Don't bother. I've seen enough." My mother shifted in her seat, her hands folding neatly in her lap, like she was trying to look composed, but there was a faint tremor in her fingers. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice low. "Then tell me," I shot back, my chest tight. "Tell me what I'm supposed to think when I walk in on my husband holding my mother's hand in our bedroom." My husband stepped forward, his palms up in some weak gesture of peace. "We were just talking." "On our bed?" My voice cracked on the last word, the hurt cutting deeper than I'd expected. They exchanged a quick glance, and in that flicker of connection, I saw the truth they wouldn't speak. My pulse pounded in my ears, and I realized this wasn't about catching them in the act. It was about the betrayal that had been living in this house for far longer than I knew. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything or demand they confess. Instead, I felt this strange, icy clarity settle over me, as if some part of me had been preparing for this all along. I looked at them, really looked, and saw fear in his eyes, defiance in hers. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room. My footsteps slow, deliberate. I could feel them watching me, waiting for the explosion that never came. Downstairs, I grabbed my coat and keys, my movements mechanical, almost calm. The truth was, I wasn't calm at all. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the keys, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Outside, the night air hit me like a slap, cold and bracing. I sat in my car for a long moment, staring at the dark outline of the house. If I confronted them now, they'd twist it, turn it into some misunderstanding, make me doubt what I'd seen. No, I needed more. I needed something undeniable, something that would burn through every lie they could invent. My mind was already moving ahead, plotting where I could place more cameras, what conversations I could record, how I could catch them in a way that even they couldn't talk themselves out of. If they thought tonight was the end of my suspicion, they were wrong. Tonight was only the beginning. The next morning, I moved through the house like nothing had happened. I made coffee, asked about their plans for the day, even kissed my husband on the cheek before he left. My mother was in the kitchen too, sipping tea like she belonged there, like last night hadn't happened. She gave me a measured smile when I returned with equal precision. As soon as they were both gone, I got to work. I retrieved the spare cameras I'd ordered weeks ago, along with a small audio recorder I'd kept in a drawer for emergencies. Every placement was strategic, one in the living room, angled to catch anyone on the couch. Another in the hallway outside the bedroom, the recorder tucked behind a stack of cookbooks in the kitchen. I worked quickly, my heart hammering every time I thought I heard a car outside. By the time I finished, the house looked exactly as it had before. That evening, I played the role of the oblivious wife and daughter perfectly. I laughed at dinner, asked my mother about her garden, listened to my husband talk about work. But underneath the surface, I was counting the hours until I could review the footage. When they both finally went to bed, I slipped into the guest room and opened my laptop. The first few clips were ordinary, almost boring, until one in the kitchen made me freeze. My mother's voice, low but clear.
She suspects something. And then his reply, just as calm, "We'll have to be more careful."
I replayed the clip 3 times. My fingers clenched so tight on the laptop edge that my knuckles ached. The way they spoke, measured, unhurried, wasn't the panic of people caught in an affair. It was strategy. I kept listening. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the background, making their voices sound even colder. My mother's tone shifted, dropping lower. It has to look like an accident. That way, she can't make trouble. My chest tightened so sharply I had to remind myself to breathe. "And the money?" my husband asked almost too quickly. "Once she's out of the picture," my mother replied, "everything will go to you. We'll be fine." There was a pause, the sound of a spoon clinking against a mug, and then her voice again, softer but no less lethal. "She'll never see it coming." My vision blurred for a moment. Rage and disbelief tangled into something primal. This wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about survival. They weren't just destroying my marriage. They were planning to destroy me. I closed the laptop slowly, forcing my hands to stop shaking. If I confronted them now, I could end up exactly where they wanted me, out of the way and powerless. No, I needed more. Proof that would hold up anywhere, against any lie they could spin. But more than that, I needed to stay alive long enough to use it.
The next few days, I became someone else entirely. To them, I was still the same wife and daughter, smiling at the right moments, nodding at the right words. But inside, every move I made was calculated. I stopped drinking anything I didn't pour myself. If my mother offered to make me tea, I'd thank her sweetly and forget to drink it. I started eating only after they did, watching their plates closely, memorizing every bite. At night, I locked my bedroom door, claiming I needed quiet to sleep, and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. I began leaving the house at odd hours, telling them I had errands, but really I was meeting with a friend in private, someone I trusted enough to hold copies of the recordings. "If anything happens to me," I told her, "you know what to do." I could feel their eyes on me more than before, especially my mother's, as if she sensed I was slipping out from under her control. But I also saw the tiny cracks in their composure, the quick glances between them, the hushed conversations that cut off when I entered the room. I was no longer just their target. I was their unknown variable. And the more unpredictable I became, the more nervous they seemed. That gave me power. Small, fragile power, but it was enough to keep me moving forward.
It happened on a rainy Thursday night. I'd returned home earlier than planned, parking a block away so they wouldn't hear the car. The rain was heavy enough to cover my footsteps as I slipped up the side path to the kitchen window. The light was on inside, casting their silhouettes against the curtains. I couldn't see faces, but I could hear them, clearer than I expected, the storm muffling the rest of the world. "She's been too quiet lately," my husband said, his voice tense. "That's fine," my mother answered, her tone almost dismissive. "Quiet means she's given up." A pause, then the scrape of a chair. "So, when?" he asked. "This weekend," she replied without hesitation. "The cabin is perfect, isolated, no neighbors. By the time anyone finds her, it'll be too late." I felt my stomach turn, that air around me tightening. The cabin. I knew exactly which one she meant. My father's old hunting retreat in the mountains, a place we hadn't visited in years. It had no cell service, no one around for miles. He said something else, too low for me to catch, but her reply was sharp. "You just need to follow my lead. She trusts you more than me." I stepped back from the window, the rain soaking through my coat, my pulse pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. This wasn't just a vague threat anymore. It was a date, a location, a plan already in motion. And I only had 2 days to stop it.
The next morning, I made sure my routine was flawless. I smiled over breakfast, asked if they were still up for a weekend getaway, and acted like the idea had been theirs all along. My mother seemed pleased, her lips curling into that subtle smirk she thought I didn't notice. My husband looked more cautious, but he nodded. Perfect. They needed to believe I was walking willingly into their trap. While they were out shopping for supplies, I set my own plan in motion. First, I called my friend again. Change of plans, I told her. If you don't hear from me by Sunday night, call the police and give them everything. Recordings, dates, all of it. I could hear the fear in her voice, but she agreed. Then I reached out to a private investigator I'd spoken to once before about something far less urgent. This time my tone left no room for hesitation. I gave him the cabin's address, the dates, and told him to be there, armed with a camera and ready to record. By the time they returned, I was back in character. I let them see me packing warm clothes, asking casual questions about the cabin as though I was reminiscing. Inside, though, every nerve in my body was wound tight. I knew I had to balance this perfectly, appear relaxed enough not to raise suspicion, but not so eager that they'd change their plan. That night, lying in bed with my husband steady breathing beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I'd make it back to this bed again.
We left early Saturday morning, the sky still heavy with the last traces of night. My husband drove, my mother in the back seat, and me in the passenger seat, staring out at the endless ribbon of highway. The air inside the car felt too still, like it was holding its breath along with me. I tried to focus on the passing scenery, bare trees, frost-tipped fields, but every mile marker felt like a countdown. They talked in low tones about the weather, about groceries we'd need once we arrived, but I caught the undercurrent, little glances between them, pauses that said more than words. I forced myself to smile when either of them looked my way, even joked once about how creepy the cabin was when I was a kid. My husband laughed, but it was too short, too controlled. As we climbed into the mountains, the cell signal dropped to nothing. My chest tightened at the sight of that little no service icon on my phone. This was it. Once we reached that cabin, there would be no easy way out. The snow on the road grew thicker, slowing our progress, but I didn't mind. Every delay felt like borrowed time. I kept reminding myself, the investigator will be there. He promised. Still, I couldn't silence the voice in my head whispering, "What if?" When the cabin finally came into view, dark wood against the white snow, chimney cold, windows blank, I felt my pulse in my throat. My mother's hand rested briefly on my shoulder as I stepped out of the car. "Just like old times," she said softly, and in that moment, I knew she wasn't talking about family vacations. Inside, the cabin smelled of old wood and dust, the air chilled for months of disuse. My boots echoed against the floorboards as I followed them inside, watching how easily they moved through the space, as if it were already theirs. My husband busied himself with stacking firewood, while my mother unpacked groceries onto the counter. It looked normal enough, but every gesture felt rehearsed, every movement calculated. I set my bag down in the small bedroom at the back, the one I'd slept in as a child. The window was still cracked at the frame, letting in thin ribbons of cold air. I kept my coat on as I stood there for a moment, scanning the room, memorizing exits, anything that could be used as a weapon if it came to that. When I rejoined them, my mother was stirring something on the stove. The smell was rich, savory, inviting.
thought we'd have a nice dinner tonight," she said, her eyes flicking to me for just a second too long. My stomach tightened. I mumbled something about being tired from the drive and excused myself to take a walk, slipping my phone into my pocket. Outside, I crunched through the snow toward the tree line, scanning for any sign of the investigator. Nothing. No car tracks, no footprints, but ours. A gust of wind cut through my coat, carrying with it the faint sound of my mother laughing from inside the cabin. It wasn't a warm laugh. By the time I went back in, the table was set. My husband poured wine into 3 glasses, his expression unreadable. As I sat down, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were both waiting for something.
The fire crackled in the corner, casting long, swaying shadows across the wooden walls. My mother set a steaming pot in the center of the table, her hands steady, her smile just wide enough to feel wrong. My husband filled my plate first, then his own, then hers. He poured the wine last, sliding my glass toward me with deliberate slowness, his eyes meeting mine for just a fraction too long. I wrapped my fingers around the glass, letting the cold stem anchor me, but didn't lift it. The food smelled good, comforting even, but the tension in the room was so thick, it made every bite feel like a dare. They talked about the drive, about how quiet it was up here this time of year, how we could stay a while if we wanted. My mother's voice was light, but her gaze kept drifting to my glass. Once I caught her watching so intently, she didn't notice I'd stopped pretending to eat. I forced myself to take small bites from my plate, avoiding the wine entirely. Instead, I laughed when they laughed, nodded when they spoke, keeping my breathing slow and my face unreadable. The trick was to make them believe nothing had changed, that I was still the woman who trusted them enough to let her guard down. Halfway through the meal, my husband reached for the wine bottle again, topping off my glass even though I hadn't touched it. "You should relax," he said, his tone almost teasing. My mother's smile sharpened. I smiled back, letting my fingers graze the glass and then set it aside. "Maybe later," I said softly. And I swear, for just a second, I saw a flicker of frustration cross her face. After dinner, my mother insisted on clearing the table herself, shooing me toward the living room with a forced cheerfulness that felt like a dismissal. My husband stayed behind to help, but I could hear their voices, low, hurried, from the kitchen. I moved toward the fireplace, pretending to poke at the logs, straining to catch fragments of their conversation. "Tonight, before she," my mother's voice. "Sure it'll work?" my husband asked. "It has to." The clink of glass on glass followed, then the soft pop of a cork. I turned my head just enough to see them through the doorway, my mother pouring something from a small, dark bottle into one of the wine glasses. She stirred it lightly with her finger, glancing toward me to make sure I wasn't watching. I stepped back toward the fire, letting the heat sting my face, masking the cold rush of fear in my chest. They were moving faster than I expected. I had assumed they'd wait until later, after I'd gone to bed, when I'd be easier to handle. But now, I realized the plan might unfold before the night had even fully settled in. The sound of footsteps made me straighten. My husband entered, glass in hand, and sat beside me. "One drink," he urged, pressing it toward me. His smile was meant to be disarming, but it didn't reach his eyes. I wrapped my hands around the glass, feeling the weight of it. The investigator still hadn't shown up yet. There was no safety net yet. I needed more time. I set the wine on the mantel, forcing a yawn. "Maybe after I warm up," I said, curling my legs beneath me. He didn't push, but I could feel the disappointment radiating from him. And from the kitchen, my mother's voice, too bright, too quick, called us both to relax and enjoy the night. The cabin's warmth felt suffocating now, every crackle of the fire like a countdown. My husband leaned back in his chair, studying me as though waiting for the right cue.
My mother emerged from the kitchen with a plate of cookies, the kind she used to bake when I was a child. She set them on the coffee table, her eyes flicking from me to the untouched wine glass on the mantel. "You look tired," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "Why don't you go lie down? I'll make sure everything's cleaned up out here." It wasn't a suggestion. I could hear the quiet command beneath the softness, the way she'd spoken to me when I was little and too afraid to disobey. My husband added, "Yeah, get some rest. We'll wake you when it's time for that drink." Every instinct screamed not to be alone with either of them, especially behind a closed door. I forced a smile, feigning hesitation. "Maybe I'll step outside first, get some fresh air before bed." My mother's smile froze for half a heartbeat before she recovered. "Of course, dear. Don't be long. It's freezing out there." I pulled on my coat and stepped into the night, the cold hitting me like a slap. My breath rose in clouds as I scanned the tree line again. This time, I thought I saw movement, a faint flicker of light like a reflection off glass. My pulse jumped. Maybe the investigator was here after all. I moved toward it cautiously, snow crunching under my boots. But before I could get close, the cabin door creaked open behind me. My husband's silhouette filled the doorway. "It's too cold," he called. "Come back inside." The light in the trees vanished.
I turned slowly, forcing my shoulders to relax, even though my chest was tight with frustration. The warm glow from the cabin spilled onto the snow, and behind my husband's figure, I could see my mother hovering, her arms crossed like she was guarding the doorway. I gave them a sheepish smile. All right, I said, trudging back up the steps as if the cold had gotten the better of me. Inside, the air felt heavier than before. My coat was barely off before my mother was ushering me toward the hallway. "Go get comfortable," she said, her hand brushing my back just a little too firmly. My husband lingered near the kitchen, pouring another round of wine. I paused in the hallway, catching my reflection in the small mirror by the bedroom door. My face looked pale, drawn, but my eyes were sharper than I'd ever seen them. This was the point where panic could ruin everything. I had to be calm, deliberate. "I'll change into something warmer first," I told her, slipping into the bedroom and closing the door just enough to give me a sliver of privacy. My bag was by the bed. I knelt and reached beneath the folded clothes until my fingers found the small cold weight of the pepper spray I'd hidden there. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. From the living room, their voices floated in, lower now, but urgent. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught, "After she lies down," and "just make sure she," before the rest blurred into the creak of the floorboards. I stuffed the spray into my pocket and sat on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding in my ears. Somewhere out there, I was sure the investigator was close. I just had to survive long enough for him to reach me.
I turned off the bedroom light, letting the room sink into darkness, but I didn't get under the covers. Instead, I sat in the shadow corner near the window, where I could see both the door and a thin slice of the living room through the gap. My breathing slowed as I tried to quiet the pounding in my chest. At first, there was only the low murmur of their voices. Then my husband stepped into view, carrying the wine glass I hadn't touched. He glanced toward the hallway, his eyes narrowing when he saw the light beneath my door was gone. Satisfied, he disappeared back toward the kitchen. I shifted my gaze toward the window. Snowflakes had begun to fall again, catching in the faint glow from the porch light. That's when I saw it, a flicker of movement near the tree line, just like before. A faint beam, maybe a flashlight, cutting through the dark for only a second before vanishing. My chest tightened with hope. From the living room came the sound of footsteps and the soft click of something being set down, metal against wood. My mother's voice followed, low and deliberate. "It'll be easy. She won't even wake up."
My husband muttered something I couldn't hear. I gripped the pepper spray in my pocket, my knuckles aching. Every instinct told me to burst out now, to end this before they could make a move. But if I did, and the investigator wasn't close enough, I'd be trapped. Instead, I stayed still, listening, memorizing every sound. The clink of glass, the scrape of a chair, and then quiet, too quiet.
The silence pressed in on me, heavy and deliberate, like the air just before a storm. My ears strained for any sound, but the usual creaks of the old cabin were gone. Even the fire seemed to have settled into a low, muffled hiss. Then came the faintest sound, a slow turn of the bedroom doorknob. My grip tightened around the pepper spray until my fingers ached. The door didn't open all the way, just enough for a shadow to slip through. My mother's silhouette was unmistakable, her frame blocking the faint light from the hall. She didn't move at first, just stood there listening. I stayed perfectly still, my breathing shallow. Then she took a step in, holding something in her hand, long and thin, glinting faintly in the dark. My stomach turned cold. A second shadow appeared behind her, my husband. His voice was a whisper, urgent but controlled. Do it quickly. They thought I was asleep. They thought I was defenseless. I shifted just enough to plant my feet, ready to launch myself forward if they got too close. My mother moved to the side of the bed, leaning over the lump I'd made from the pillow under the blanket. Her hand hovered, and I saw the gleam again. My heart pounded so loud I was sure they'd hear it. I waited until her wrist dipped toward the pillow. That was my cue. I surged from the shadows, aiming the pepper spray directly at her face. The hiss filled the room, followed by a sharp cry and the sound of the metal object clattering to the floor.
Her scream was raw and high, cutting through the heavy quiet of the cabin. My husband lunged toward me, his hands outstretched, but I stumbled back toward the wall, keeping the pepper spray raised. I fired again, the sharp chemical burn filling the air. He cursed, blinking rapidly, one hand clutching his face. The object my mother had dropped, a long kitchen knife, gleamed on the floor between us. My eyes locked on it for a fraction of a second, but I didn't dare go for it. If either of them recovered faster than I expected, it would be over. "Crazy! She's lost her mind!" my mother gasped, clawing at her eyes. But her voice wasn't frightened. It was furious, as if I'd just ruined something she had carefully planned for months. I moved toward the door, my back to the wall, forcing them to keep their distance. "Stay away from me!" I shouted, my voice trembling, but loud enough to carry outside. Maybe the investigator, if he was really here, would hear. My husband tried to circle around, but I darted into the hallway, keeping them both in sight. They followed, my mother still half blinded, my husband wiping his streaming eyes with his sleeve. "You're not leaving," he growled, his voice low and guttural. The way he said it made my skin crawl. I didn't answer. I just kept moving backward toward the front door, my fingers fumbling in my pocket for my phone. I didn't get a chance to pull it out. My mother lunged, grabbing at my arm. The pepper spray hissed again, and she shrieked, stumbling into the wall. Somewhere outside, over the pounding in my ears, I thought I heard the crunch of boots on snow.
The sound of boots in the snow was faint, but real. Steady, purposeful steps approaching the cabin. My chest tightened with a rush of hope so sharp it almost hurt. But there was still the matter of the 6 feet between me and the door, and 2 people determined to make sure I never reached it. My husband moved first, lunging toward me with his shoulder lowered like he was ready to tackle me. I sidestepped, the edge of the hallway table digging into my hip as I sprayed again. The mist caught him across the cheek, enough to make him stagger and curse. My mother, half blind and furious, grabbed a decorative vase from the side table and hurled it. It shattered against the wall inches from my head, ceramic shards spraying across the floor. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, but I didn't slow. "Help!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "In here!"
I fumbled with the deadbolt, my hands trembling so hard I nearly missed it. My husband lunged again, catching the edge of my coat, but I yanked forward with everything I had. The fabric tore, sending me stumbling against the door just as it swung open. A tall man in a heavy parka filled the frame, his flashlight beam cutting through the chaos. His voice was calm but firm. "Ma'am, step outside, now." I didn't wait. I bolted past him into the freezing night, the snow crunching under my boots like it was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Behind me, I heard the investigator's voice harden into a command. "Sir, stay where you are." The cabin's warm light spilled out into the snow, but for the first time all night, it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like the end of something I'd been trapped in for too long. The cold hit me like a slap, sharp and bracing, pulling me fully into the moment. I stood just beyond the porch, gulping the frozen air as my legs trembled from adrenaline. The snow was still falling, soft and slow, but inside the cabin it sounded like a storm, raised voices, hurried footsteps, the investigator's steady commands cutting through the chaos. I could see them through the doorway in brief flashes. My husband, red-eyed and snarling, tried to explain, gesturing wildly toward me. My mother clutched the wall, her face streaked with tears, whether from the pepper spray or from the collapse of her plan, I couldn't tell. She kept pointing at me too, mouthing words I couldn't hear. The investigator stayed calm, his flashlight beam moving deliberately from one to the other. He glanced toward me once, giving the smallest nod, as if to say, "You're safe now." But my heart wouldn't believe it yet. I wrapped my arms around myself, the sting of the torn coat letting the wind bite at my skin. That coat had been a gift from my husband, one of the first after we were married. I remembered how proud he'd been, how gentle his smile had seemed back then. And now, that same man had stood in my bedroom doorway, telling my mother to do it quickly. The nausea rose in my throat, but I forced it down. Not now, not while their shadows still moved inside. A sudden loud thud snapped my attention back, something heavy hitting the wall. The investigator's voice rose, more commanding now. "Ma'am, drop it. Sir, sit down, now." I realized my hands were clenched so tightly, my nails had dug half moons into my palms. I didn't relax them. Not yet. The flashing red and blue lights painted the snow in restless colors, each pulse washing over the cabin like a heartbeat. Two uniformed officers moved past me, their boots crunching hard against the ice. I caught fragments of their voices, calm, measured, the way people sound when they've done this before. The investigator stepped out first, his parka dusted with snow. "They're not going anywhere," he said simply, his breath clouding in the cold. Behind him, I saw my husband and my mother being led out, each with a separate officer holding their arm. My husband's eyes met mine for the briefest second. No words, just a look, cold and empty. My mother didn't look at me at all. The cuffs clicked shut, metal on bone, and they were walked toward the waiting patrol cars. I stood rooted to the spot, watching the scene play out like it was happening to someone else. The investigator said gently, staring me toward the porch steps, "Paramedics are on their way to check you over." I nodded, but my eyes stayed fixed on the snow. It was only when the last car door slammed that the tension in my shoulders gave way. My breath hitched, and then it broke, quiet at first, then shaking harder until I had to press my face into my hands. It wasn't fear anymore. It was the release of every moment I had held myself still and silent. Every second I had told my body not to shake, not to cry, not to give them the satisfaction. Now, with the cold biting my cheeks and the night finally, blessedly quiet, I let it all go. Somewhere behind me, an officer said something into his radio. The wind carried the words away, and I didn't chase them. For the first time in months, I didn't need to know what came next. I was alive, and that was enough.